Very good. I'd like to call our meeting to order. This is the October 10th meeting of the Finance and Budget Committee. So we'll do a roll call.
Committee Member McMillan,
Can the people online hear us?
Committee Member McMillan,
Just say here.
Here.
Okay, here. Good. Okay.
Councilmember Reed,
Here.
Councilmember Kelly, Councilmember Nguyen, Committee Member Rikus,
Here.
Councilmember Newsma,
Here.
and Chair Livingston.
Here. Very good. We have a quorum, and we will get right into public comment. Do we have anyone online or in? Looks like there's no one here live for public comment.
We have Mike Vasilko. If you would like to make public comment, please unmute yourself.
I am unmuted. Yes, I have three comments. One, I was reading this audit report, page 22 of 37. It's pretty telling, I guess, under the condition and context portion where they talk about procedures that we're not following. In this case, they only tested 9 conditions, but for the amount of $2.5 million. Many of these things are things I've complained about for years. So I hope somebody will address that. I'd like to assume you're going to get the budget document tonight. You're going to review it, the presentation, and then you're going to have another opportunity at your next meeting to have more discussion about it. And I say that because last night at the city meeting, there was agenda item A11 for the water rate increase. I don't know who referred it from your committee to the council, but my understanding is, listening to your meeting minutes, your video from your last meeting, nobody approved anything from your group. Nobody made recommendations to APW or to City Council. There were a lot of questions and comments, and you asked for more analysis on the bonds for next year. One of your members said, "Well, look at it for 13% versus whatever it was for 2024, and finally stop asking about the 2022, 2023 bonds." So there was a lot of questions. I'm probably going to run out of time, but my basic question is, who forwarded this on? Because council now says they're going to vote on it at their next meeting, and you guys didn't finish your deliberations. So I think this needs to be called back to your committee, whoever the council members were that tried to push it off to the city council. I mean, I don't know, they should be reprimanded or something, but it seems like council members are trampling on your authority to review and make recommendations to the city council. It was premature last night to have this discussion that took place regarding A11. And one last thing, I don't know how many times I've heard the question asked about seeing a summary of all funds, all city funds, what the surpluses are over and above the reserve amounts. As my understanding is, that has still not been provided after months of asking for it. So those are my oh, by the way, the rate increase they were proposing last night was 17.5%. It has nothing to do with any of your conversations, nowhere near 17.5% water rate increase. So I hope you're going to pull that back into your committee. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Are there any other comments?
Jim Hughes, would you like to
Aye.
make a public comment?
Oh, actually, I don't know why I'm showing up as Jim Hughes. It's actually Mary Rosinski. It's just bizarre. But anyways, I actually agree with everything that Mike Pasilko just said. I was going to speak to the audit too. It's disconcerting that there are those many mistakes, and we've seen a lot of sole source budgeting. I don't know what our policy is. So I guess the question is, do you all know what the policy is? And should we be having something where that is reviewed more and not just brought up, is this going to be a sole source because it's going to save us money and therefore we're going to do stuff? I also wonder what this impacts on us getting other federal awards. At what point are we not getting it? Is it third-party companies that aren't giving us the information? So if you could maybe address that and find out what that is all about. And again, with the water, there were so many questions about the water, and the taxpayers in this city, I think, deserve more detail on what is happening here. We have a lot of different funds, and that whole conversation last week was very confusing. And as Mike said, I was watching that meeting last night too, and I don't think anyone really has a clear picture of how much money is being spent, where, and why. And, as you know, a long time ago when the whole water selling project was going forward, it was going to say we were going to save money. And maybe we are, maybe we're not, but I would just like it if you guys could help iron that down. So thank you. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. I'm sorry, who's next? That was it. Okay, so that is it for public comment. Thank you for everybody for your comments. Okay, so I think the meeting minutes from last time, hopefully everyone had a chance to review them.
I will
Any-
move approval.
Okay, someone second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right.
Very good. Okay, on the next section, I would like, Hitesh, you can take us through the single audit discussion. I would like, when we get to section 5, I'm proposing that, look, once we start talking about the budget, I think it's going to be hard to stop that discussion. So I am proposing that we reorder this agenda slightly. We do the discussion of the solid waste fund status, we do the affordable housing discussion, and then we leave, an hour and a half to an hour and 15 minutes. So the bulk of our discussion would then be on the proposed budget, because obviously there's a lot to get through on
Good
that.
idea.
So is everybody okay with that reordering? Okay, very good.
With no objection.
Okay. So, Mr. Desai, if you could take us through review of the 22 single audit.
Mr. Chair, will you be able to address the questions we asked during public comment? Especially,
We will take on board what you said, but we're not going to specifically address the points that you raised. They do relate to some of the things that we are discussing, and we can separately go through what was the expectation relative to the water referral. I think we discussed that in quite a bit of detail, but we can discuss if we were somehow short an actual, if there was an expectation of a formal approval. So, at any rate.
Okay.
right, 'cause your meeting minutes say that the committee discussed these items, that raised several questions,
Yes.
and they agreed to continue this item for future discussion.
yeah,
So that's
okay.
all regarding the water.
Yeah.
Should come back.
So, okay. Thank you for your input. All right, let's get forward, Mr. Desai, to the next point.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, Chair Livingston and the members of the Finance and Budget Committee. So the single audit required where you spend more than $750,000 in the federal funds. And obviously, the Evanston is subject to this audit every year. Obviously, you would see that the whole report is attached there from our independent auditor's report. And it says the financial statements referred to above present fairly in all material respects the expenditure of federal awards of the city for the year ended December. So they are giving us the unmodified or unqualified, whatever we call the highest form. So it's good. I heard some comments. Those were related to some of those purchasing things. And some of them, yeah, we have made the changes, but we made the changes in the beginning of the year. And this was the audit as of December 31st. So the auditor said we still will have to put it there, you know. You can respond that, yes, we have implemented starting 23, so it won't be there. A couple of things we are still debating. We have made a few changes in response to their observation last year as well as this year. But they have a bigger burden where, like, suppose there are platforms, common purchasing platform like Sourcewell and all that, where we buy from, and they want us to monitor whether they are complying with all the policies or not. Now, this has never come up in the past audits. Maybe because these are all expenditures, what you see in the comments are out of ARPA, and there are a lot more restrictions than in a regular grant. So that's why they say, yeah, at least we have to report it to you, that even you have to look at whether Sourcewell is following all the policies, whether you have, there's a one thing called which is a debarment, and the other searches which our department did, but we could not provide the exact, what I call the evidence that, okay, this is the thing proving that, yeah, we did the search, so that's why the comment. But overall, yeah, the report is an unqualified or unmodified opinion from the auditors regarding all the federal expenditure.
So they do the audit as of 12/31, not 6/30?
No, we are calendar year, fiscal year, so this is as of December 31st, 2022.
Okay.
Why haven't we seen this before?
What's that?
I don't recall us looking at this last year.
No, we did that. Every year, the single audits, the Evanston has been subject to it for at least, I know, I have to see whether we can find out. Jess, can you look into that, whether we came to the, but yeah, city of Evanston is subject to the single audit for many years.
Right, and I guess my point was we've never gone through this before.
Yeah, we're checking it, whether, I thought we came to this, I'll have to check whether we went to the city council or came through the finance budget and then went to the city council.
So, Mr. Desai, on the point relative to the purchase orders, is there anything you'd like to add relative to the findings?
Right, so as I said, some of those things, yes, we have made changes. We changed our purchasing policies. We brought up this thing, I think even at the directors meeting with the purchasing has issued a couple of emails and told all the buyers, you know, that we will have to do it. So, yeah, going forward now, since they have kind of repeated some of them, at least as far as we continue to spend ARPA for maybe next year and a half, you know, we'll try to ask the department when they are purchasing anything out of that ARPA to look for the things which are mentioned in the audit report. Like even Sourcewell, yes, at least they can see whether they are complying with all the policies.
And I just want to say it was presented to the committee on October 11th, 2022.
I don't recall it. Is this the same auditor that we've used in the
Yes.
past?
Yes.
And were there weaknesses identified last year? I don't recall the report from last year. Were there weaknesses identified last year like are brought up on page 14? Of
Let me see. It was in the kind of, maybe I would say limited, but ultimately it was related to the, what we call a procurement thing. And there was some even debate where I think we kind of disagreed with the auditors in terms of the evidence provided and whatnot. And as I said, we made few changes to the purchasing policy, conveyed to the department. We will again do the same thing this year, kind of have the, you know, meetings with the department and the purchasing persons, the managers, and kind of stressed enough to make sure they comply with all these things.
Councilmember Newsma.
So were the findings limited to ARPA expenditures, or are they more broadly systemic?
It's more for the ARPA. These are all purchases.
All
and they have a
purchases,
long-
all purchases under ARPA?
Right, and they have a long list of requirements under the ARPA.
Okay,
And that's
okay.
what, I mean, one thing with the, as I said, the third-party vendors, as I said, we never saw that comment from the previous single audit for
Right.
many years.
Right, so the audit is not looking at all of our purchasing, it's only looking at purchasing under federal
Under the federal
grants,
grant,
of
yes.
which ARPA is a pretty significant chunk.
Correct.
And the findings that we got dinged on were limited to ARPA,
Right.
where there are more rules than in the other.
Quite a big list, yeah.
than the
Sarah
other
can
federal
say.
areas. Okay.
And did the auditor give you a sense of how significant, how typical these
they have seen
weaknesses
that
were
with-
relative to other communities?
Right, where, I mean, particularly they see that it's, kind of practically sometimes impossible to comply with all the requirements in the ARPA side, But they were, I mean, otherwise they won't issue us the unmodified opinion, which is the highest which they can give it to us.
Sorry, I've had my light on. Okay.
Councilmember Kelly?
I mean, I think procurement is a really important topic. And I just, it says that that the city of Evanston is not in compliance with federal regulations currently. Could we have maybe I don't know if it'd be finance and budget, but I certainly would like to hear about what's been put in place to correct the situation in detail. The recommendations that they make, it'd be nice just to understand the process and how it's been,
We can
how it's
do
been
that
improved.
certainly, I mean, if you want in a couple of months, say, come up with, these are the changes, which we are kind of going to, follow through.
But to restate what I think you said, we are in compliance with our own internal procedures. This sort of internal control weakness was not mentioned in the audit.
No,
This
they
just
did
has to.
mention, they said also with our own internal that we're not in compliance either. It said both federally and locally.
So
It's
we have
mentioned.
this, I mean, at one instance, I think they said that, it was in the policy, but particular department did not follow. Obviously, there was some instance of turnover in that department, and maybe it was overlooked by that department. But in all, when they looked at this is just you see the couple of things. I mean, they have looked maybe, I don't know, tens of transactions, and we are talking about millions of dollars. And they were overall happy with the kind of internal controls, kind of documentation we keep it, and the grant monitoring, we do it here.
So can I suggest, Councilmember, did you have a follow-up or your light was on?
No,
I didn't turn it off.
I would appreciate a session on procurement about what we're doing to improve the process, to be in compliance, not just, with federal grants, but overall, to understand our procurement process. I think that would be beneficial for the Finance and Budget Committee.
Can we suggest we schedule that for some time in the first quarter? So say January or February after we get through the budget process. It'd be good to know exactly where do you stand relative to these recommendations. And I think equally importantly, where we were out of compliance relative to our long-standing policies and procedures, as opposed to, I think we understand under something new like ARPA, it could take some time to get fully compliant with a complex standard on procurement.
I
So,
agree,
okay. Very good. So we'll follow that up. We'll follow it up later. So there was no action required aside from that review.
It goes to the council, and they will kind of accept and place on file.
Okay. Very good. All right.
Do we need to take a vote here?
I don't think we have to do, the action is just to review,
to
not to
council.
recommend. So,
Yeah, it has to be referred to the city council to be accepted and placed on file, so there has to be a vote here.
okay.
I'll move referral to city council to accept and place on file.
Second.
Councilmember Kelly? Councilmember Nguyen? Councilmember Nusma?
Aye.
Committee Member Rikus?
Aye.
Chair Livingston?
Aye.
Councilmember Burns?
Aye.
Councilmember Reed? Oh, he removed,
Aye.
sorry. Committee Member McMillan?
Aye.
All right. So very good. We will follow up on that in the first quarter. And now, in line with what I mentioned, we want to jump over the budget, do that last, and do the solid waste fund status discussion now.
So moved.
All right,
Chair Livingston, members of the committee, Noel Rodriguez, Public Services Bureau Chief. Today I'll be discussing the status of the Solid Waste Fund and seeking direction to increase service fees to offset unforeseen expenditures. I'll start by providing some background and recent increase in the service fees. Last year in August, staff presented service rate increase options to this committee in order to reduce its net operating loss. From that, recommendation was provided to transfer $1 million from the general fund reserves to the solid waste fund, which was approved in September of 2022. Additionally, 2 rate increases were recommended. The first increase for 1.8% taking effect at the beginning of this year, and another recommended increase of 1.8% for 2024. The infusion of funds and the first increase allow the solid waste fund to reduce the net operating losses and present a more sustainable rate structure that will leave the fund with a positive balance at the end of this year. It is important to note that contracts for residential condominium refuse will expire in 2025. And staff will begin working on an RFP at the end of next year. And once staff has a better understanding of those potential price changes, those figures will be plugged into the projection model, and any necessary adjustments will be evaluated at that time. Next, I'll discuss the unforeseen expenditures that are impacting the fund. First, our wage increases. Union staff was granted an 11% increase that retros to the beginning of this year. Union staff will also be receiving a 3% increase in 2024, another increase for 3% in 2025, and the last agreed increase for 3% in 26. The total of these increases are far higher than the 2.5% that staff used in fund projections. These wage increases also impact the cost of fleet maintenance, as fleet staff is also covered by the same union contract. So maintenance and fuel will increase in 2024 from $322,000 to nearly $419,000. Lastly, Swings facility will be undergoing a roof replacement project in 2024 with an estimated cost of $4 million. Based on the use agreement, the City of Evanston is responsible for 5.6% of that cost, which is approximately $225,000, and a full payment due in October by October 1st, 2024. So I'll move on to the first scenario, which reflects the previously recommended 1.8% increase for 2024, and essentially no other adjustments to the fund. This scenario provides an additional $83,000 in revenue, but quickly allows the fund to run into a deficit in 2025. This next slide provides the dollar figures for each of the services. The best one to probably use would be the 95-gallon card, as the best example is roughly 3/4 of customers use that card. Here we can see that that increase would amount to $5.04 as an annual increase. Moving on to scenario 2, this proposes increases for the next 2 years, with 2024 seeing a 10% increase and 2025 seeing a 4.5% service increase. This option decreases the net operating loss in 2024, and the additional increase in 2025 provides steps towards a sustainable rate structure and closer to the desired target fund balance with reserves. Again, this table shows the dollar figures for the services and what those increases would look like. Again, using the 95-gallon, we can see that for the first year with an increase of 10%, a customer would look at a $27.99 increase for that year. Additionally, for the following year with the 4.5% increase, they would be seeing a $13.85 increase for that year. Next scenario proposes a single 15.8% increase in 2024, which balances the budget and places the fund on a path to reach the targeted fund balance with reserves by 2025. This option, of course, requires a higher increase in a single year as opposed to spreading it out. Again, this table shows the dollar figures for those services, in the 95-gallon cart, again, using that as an example, a customer would be looking at a $44.22 increase for the year. Last is scenario 4, which was not included in the memo attached in this evening's agenda, but is an alternative increase spread equally in the next 2 years. This scenario proposes equal rate increases, the first increase of 7.5% in 2024, and the second increase of 7.5% in 2025. This scenario decreases the net operating loss in 2024, and by 2025, with the second increase, we begin to see positive net operating revenue and closer to reaching the desired target fund balance with a 16.6% reserve. Again, this table shows the dollar figures for those increases. Again, using the 95-gallon annual fee cart, a customer would be looking at a $20.99 increase in 24 and $22.56 increase in 2025. Lastly, this table shows the breakdown of all the scenarios in the services with the dollar figures. And that's something that was not originally included in the memo, something I can provide for further review. And that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to take direction from the committee and answer any questions that you may have.
Maybe you can summarize. Obviously, the union contractual labor increases are now unknown, but what sort of cost savings initiatives do you have otherwise that you could think about relative to your operations? What kind of savings do you target on an annual basis to reduce operating expenses, or how do you think about that?
Yes, so we have looked into many forms of reducing operational costs. One came in the form of not having the ability to secure a vehicle. That was in 2022. We were unable to secure a vehicle, which allowed us to bring in some of those savings, although that was not the desired or the initial thought for it, as we are now experiencing another year without a new truck. Aside from that, staff has looked for other ways to reduce in terms of cutting down where overtime is being eliminated by scheduling staff to work additional hours or rescheduling them to avoid incurring overtime. Outside of that, I can look into other initiatives that we've taken, and I can get back to you.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, go ahead.
Oh.
Pardon me, just to build off on that. Good evening, Chair Livingston, members of the committee, Edgar Cano, Public Works Agency Director. We do want to point out that the Solid Waste Fund, a lot of the expenditures that are tied to it are based on our contracts with our haulers and our salaries, as well as our vehicle and equipment. So even though there are small facets of the fund that we could look for savings, overall it is governed and it is run based on the commitment that we do have with our haulers and the personnel costs.
So, Councilmember Newsma, I think you had your light on. Then, Sherry, we'll go to you next.
So we have our contracts with the haulers. Sorry, with my microphone on. The contracts with the haulers expire at the end of '25, but you're projecting costs through 2029. So you're making some assumptions as to what the new contracts might be.
Correct. We're using 3.5%.
3.5%. For each year, you know.
Correct.
Got it, okay. And where does recycling fit in here? Is that included under the residential refuse?
I want to refer to Kevin Johnson, our recycling environmental manager, supervisor.
So yes, recycling, yard waste, everything is included in this.
In the residential
Yes.
refuse? Okay, great. All right, I just had those two quick questions, and I'll weigh in later.
Sherry?
He was asking about recycling. Was I able to answer the question, or was there clarification that was needed?
How do we pay for recycling? And is it on this chart?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair Livingston, and members of the committee. Brian Zimmerman, Solid Waste Coordinator. In this chart up here, the recycling fee is embedded into the service charges for the 95-gallon and 65-gallon and additional cart expenditures. How we pay for that is out of expenses to our staff who collect that on a weekly basis from residents among, just those expenses. But they're also included in the condo unit rates and the multifamily unit rates for how we cover up for
I
the
did see recycling
expenses.
explicitly spelled out, so I just wanted to make sure we
those are-
understand that recycling is built into this.
It's built into it, and it's carried through a few different service mechanisms because we do offer services not just to residents, but condo units and apartment complexes and multifamily units abroad the city. So it's kind of, we have one expenditure that we have out of it, but where that service is offered to is to a variety of people. So just making sure that that's clear.
Thanks. Thank you for including that fourth scenario. I think that's the one I'm inclined to go with, but we'll see what everyone else has to say here.
I had two quick questions. Last time we took money from the general fund, is there any money we can take from that to subsidize?
That is not an option that was explored, as I believe it was not available, but
Good evening, Clayton Black, Budget Manager. That is an option that the city always has. Our budget presentation gets into some of our concerns about the current fund balance in the general fund and our sustainability moving forward. But it's certainly within the city council's purview to move $1 million or however much they feel from general fund to solid waste fund.
Okay. And I agree. I like the option where you divide it. Is that going to be a problem because you're not getting the money up front and the expenses? Or we're still going to be okay if we divide it over 2 years?
I can go back to that.
Yeah, I couldn't see it that well, but
It still is below target.
It's still below?
But it's, it's part of our overall liquidity. It's not going to cause a
Okay.
problem with the city in total.
And the last question I have is, the dollar amount isn't huge, but the percentage, the perceived, 1.8, 7.5, have we had increases this high in the past?
Not in the recent past.
And on that point, in the recent past, the rates have been flat, haven't they? Was it for a period of time, or what sort of increase were people seeing in, say, the last 5 years or so?
Let me refer back to Brian Zimmerman.
Yeah, I guess, as long as we have these enormous reserves, and we can talk about this more at length when Clayton gets into the budget, I would think we should just move it over from the reserves myself. I philosophically don't really understand carrying all these big funds in the main.
So if you could recap the recent increases.
Thank you, Chair Livingston. The rate increases to staff's knowledge over recent years has been very minimal. The 1.8% increase was some of the first in the most recent years. There have been incremental increases that have gone before council in the past, but I don't think, to our knowledge, anything was predominantly substantial. Usually they come around contract times where we have to reevaluate fee structures, but most of those contracts have not been renewed since 2017.
Yeah, that's what I recall, that it was fairly flat. And I think that's a recurring theme in certain areas, that there's been a desire to hold things flat when we are anything but immune from inflation, and it just creates an issue with a deferred larger increase later, which is some of what's going to come up in our broader discussion. So, the city is I think more exposed to inflation than most organizations, and so any area that is sort of pay for service where rate increases are artificially held low is not good. Not good budgeting. It's just not reflective of the underlying wage increases, fuel costs, And that, like with water, I think water is another one that we talked about before, that who made the decision to hold water and sewer flat from, I think, the 2000s is a large part of what has created an underinvestment in the water, the water mains now. So I think this is just another example of the increase looks big because we have not been keeping up with known inflation, having a desire to have a nominal to no increase. And we're not immune to inflation, and I think we need to, we need to address that, so.
Chair. Chair, I just want to flag that my hand is up.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Councilmember Reed. Yeah.
Thank you. I am curious, I'll also second, I think I am in favor, along with Councilmember Newsom, of going with scenario 4. I hear the concerns from folks about, or the desire from folks to pull funding from our general reserve, but I do think that clearly there's a structural issue here that needs to be resolved, and that'll only be bandaging it over for the immediate term, and in line with what Chair Livingston just said. But one thing I'm curious about is exploring, charges for usage. Is there a way that we can, charge, if you're not using if you're not producing as much waste, is there a way for us to charge you less? And if you're producing more waste, putting more strain on the system, you get charged more. And I know that could be somewhat complex, and I'm seeing, I think, a hand from one of my colleagues to answer this, or.
Thank you, Councilmember Reed. I was going to go to that same point. We already have that option under, we have the choice of using a 65-gallon or 95-gallon refuse cart for single-family homes at least. And the difference there is, under scenario 4, about, ballpark $150 a year. And I have made that point before in other venues that it's really not difficult at all, at least for my family of 4, to get by with this 65-gallon cart. And from what Mr. Zimmerman has told us, the majority of Evanston homes use the larger cart. And so I wanted to ask about the impact of, I want to ask how the assumptions underlying the ratio of large to small carts, and if more people move to the smaller carts, how would that impact these numbers? So, Councilmember Reed, I think that speaks to your underlying question.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. Yeah.
So there will be some challenges. I mean, we can obviously structure the charges to residents as we need to make changes to. We can come up with our own structure, but usually how it's charged from the hauler's perspective is a flat unit rate for most communities, because they have to cover their costs to make those trips to a person's household or everyone's household, regardless of the number or volume of container. They're still making that stop, and they have to still pick up and service once a week, and that's usually where the brunt of their costs come from. So a lot of what they charge or bid out from in a lot of communities is a straight unit cost, which is very consistent with other northern Cook County communities. But we can inflect that scale on how we distribute those costs to different users depending on volume, cart numbers. We kind of already do that, to your point, already.
So our contract with the hauler is built on an assumption of whatever percent, 65, whatever percent 95.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, currently it is, and it could be something different. Some communities just do a flat rate. The number of households that are in the community, you pay $20 per household that the hauler comes and picks up. However many number of carts. Yeah. There's communities do it different ways.
So hypothetically, if every single-family household in Evanston switched to the smaller cart, we'd be bringing in significantly less money than we had anticipated, and that would be a problem.
Yeah, we would potentially be in a shortfall where we couldn't cover the contracted expense that we are on the hook for paying anyway.
Okay.
If we had that structure.
So there is an individual incentive, as from a homeowner's perspective, to use a smaller cart. They would save $150 a year. If everybody did that, we'd have a financial problem.
It just means we got to kind of rework everything to get to that system. We currently don't have that, and it's not something we could just easily jump into to do a system like that. But it doesn't mean it's.
But with the contracts expiring at the end of next year, or end of 2025, if we look at 26, we can maybe built in that incentive.
And we do have the incentive to reduce the amount that we do send to landfill. We do have expenditures that are for disposal that go to Swank, and we have a certain commitment on that, but we do see a decrease or savings when we send less to that transfer station. So there is an incentive as a community to recycle more, to compost more material, with the potential savings on that element. We also save because we are a part of Swank's incentive, recycling incentive program as a community. We don't pay a tip fee or anything like that for the recycling that we collect, which is another cost savings that the community can and the city can see by not by sending more recycling out. So there's some other incentives to do more
So the time
things.
to implement any of these changes would be with the next contract.
That'd probably be the most likely point to do some of this
So
stuff.
maybe we can move on to Councilmember
If
Burns.
we're-
Again, we have
I'm
a.
sorry. I want, if I
Councilmember
could
Ray,
jump
go
back in,
ahead.
I
Go
appreciate
ahead.
Councilmember Newsom's questions are really illuminating there. And so to that, and so really helpful information there. I've said this a number of times. I will say it again. I think we have to rethink the way we collect trash holistically. The idea that, that Evanston residents bring trash, bring the materials into their house that produce the trash, but then expect the city to come individually pick it up, I think is a concept that is, is not proving to be financially feasible for the city and costly to taxpayers. There are a number of communities in the U.S. and particularly in European countries where there are centralized points. And what I'm hearing from staff is that really, whether, the waste hauler is picking up, a huge amount of trash or a small, bin, it's essentially the same cost to them because they have to make the stop in the first place. And so really it seems like our goal should be to reduce the number of stops that they have to make. And if we can look at a model where we have centralized pickup locations throughout neighborhoods or drop-off locations, I should say, for residents, pickup locations for the haulers, there could potentially be substantial savings there, both to the city and to the hauler, or maybe there's a model looking at the integrating more tech, and again, this would really be on the hauler to implement something like this, but where someone can say, hey, today I actually don't need my trash picked up this week. We produce so little trash, you don't have to make a stop here. And so maybe that's a medium between, my kind of European radical model of having centralized locations and just reducing the number of stops. And so I would love for us to, I forget, when is the next contract? Is that 2026, 20?
The primary refuse agreements for residential expire October 31st of 2025. So moving into 2026 is when they will be in the next round.
So we could study alternatives after we, as we get into the next contract period. Is there something radically different we could do? Councilmember Burns.
Well, and I would just say, I'll just say that I think we need to start studying that now, because when it's time for the contract, it's time to execute on something, not to begin studying if there's an alternative. So I would suggest, can we find a more efficient, cost-saving way of collecting trash, keeping the community clean, but not having this so heavily subsidized by the city.
Councilmember Burns.
Yeah, first question under revenue, I see property taxes. I'm just trying to understand that. Is there a portion of property tax that goes into solid waste fund revenue? Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, there is currently a levy for property taxes. I think it's 16 to 20% of that. Yeah, comes from property taxes currently.
And then, at least at this moment, are we saying, I'm trying to make sure I'm understanding this right, that if you add up service charges, fees, what we get from property taxes, that we're not bringing in enough to cover personnel, vehicles, contractual costs?
you say that question one more time?
So we're not bringing in enough revenue to cover our costs in the solid waste fund?
Essentially, yeah, our net operating costs, we can't even meet the reserve limit that we're supposed to have for the enterprise.
And was that always the case, or is this only because of the recent payroll increases, or how long has this been an issue? Yeah, go ahead.
As Bureau Chief Rodriguez mentioned, we had came back to this committee last year and issued some of the same kind of statuses that we were operating at a net negative for the fund, and that's where that $1 million transfusion from the general fund happened last year for some of the same reasons.
And how long have we been running a negative in this fund? Do you know? How many years?
I don't know personally. I would take from stock that it's been something of a slow decline for the foreseeable future, with some upticks due to small increases here and there.
Yeah, I just want to say, just generally, I think, especially for this type of service, the charges and the fees really should cover costs. I think that is incredibly important, and not just, not just for solid waste, but really for everything similar to this. It doesn't make sense. Chair, I don't want to mischaracterize what you said, but I think for me, what it does is it gives this false notion to community members, that we're covering costs from fees and charges. And a community member will tell you quick, like, look, I'm paying all this money and this isn't happening the way I want it to, or I believe the service should be improved. So from a community member standpoint, they're under the impression that these fees are going directly to covering the costs and making sure that we can deliver the service at the highest quality. And it's not, right? And so I want to say, just generally speaking, I support a path to figuring out how we can make sure that these fees and charges cover the cost. And I'm also trying to understand, what is our reserve goal for this fund? Is there a reserve goal? Just want to make sure I'm understanding that. I probably missed it. What percentage?
That would be the 16.6%.
It's 16.6%, so it's the same. And so I understand why we want that reserve in the water fund. What emergency expenditures might you see that's applicable to our solid waste fund?
A good example would be the Swank roof project.
I'm sorry?
A good example would be the Swank roof project that we're currently obligated to pay roughly $240,000 for.
What is that again?
The Swank.
What is it, though? Can you just explain it? What is the Swank?
Swank. So Swank is the Solid Waste Agency of Northern Cook County. They have one of our transfer stations, and based on our use agreement, we are responsible for a share of those costs. And that upcoming in 2024, they have a $4 million project for the roof replacement, which again we will be contributing to that. So having those
do you know how much other communities are paying per bin? Do we have a sense of that?
I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question?
I apologize. I can't.
If we have a sense of what fees for other communities are.
What does Skokie pay? What does Wilmette pay per bin?
I don't have those figures.
Right. Councilmember Kelly.
Yeah, I think that's important that we're able to compare with other communities. So I'm understanding it would be about $18 over 2-year increase per bin, if that's what I'm understanding. And then, which seems significant to me. So just to be clear, so our ending fund balance is below the target reserve, to your question, correct?
Correct.
So we're covering costs. So in other words, like if we reduced our reserve fund policy for the solid waste fund, which is 16.6, if we reduced it to whatever, we might be in the black. So I just want to, I'm not suggesting we do, but I just want to make that point.
Yeah, and I wasn't done yet, but that's what I wanted to basically get at with that second part of the question, is just making sure that it seems like we have 16.6 across the board, and I'm not confident that we necessarily need that in every fund. And so I just want to understand why we think we need to carry 16.6 in the solid waste fund. And if it's, can we lower it? Is there, do we think we can lower it without running into any issues down the road?
I think if we want to look at what the annual gain or loss is here, these scenarios show it. Scenario 1 is where we are today, which is an approved increase of 1.8%, which for 24 is saying we would have a loss an operating loss of $650,000 almost. So it's not, the revenues are not covering the costs in '24 as things are today. The other alternatives then were to go up, scenario 2, 10%, okay, which would get the net revenue, close about half that gap. I guess some of that is because of the unusual costs related to the roof that you were just talking about. That would get us to a loss of $270,000, and then show some modest break-even numbers for '25 and '26, and then further down the road, show some negatives. In number 3, again, the net operating revenue, we would need 15.8%, one time 15.8%, under scenario 3 to get to an approximate break-even number for 2024, and then 2025 is sort of a middle ground here of, look, we have the liquidity to kind of do this halfway. In 2024, keep that increase down to 7.5%. We are still running a deficit of almost 400,000, but then the second 7.5 gets you, kind of recoups most of that, almost $300,000 deficit. We are below the target reserve balance, but I think this gives us more time to think about, are there other cost savings? So as Councilmember Nusma said, scenario 4 seems to be a middle ground. A 7.5 for 2 years, we will then be able to reassess where we are relative to how much we're adding in terms of excess of revenues over costs by the time we get to 2025, and then we can reassess, and maybe we can also look at, other additional cost savings. So I think that scenario 4 is a decent middle ground. Especially, again, we are making up for lost ground when there was not increases. It's absolutely what's happening. But, and we are below the reserve requirement in all of these. So someone wants to make a motion.
So one more comment. So in my understanding that we're below our fund balance target reserve we're projecting by 233,000?
Scenario 1 would best illustrate that.
So you're projecting this at the end of '24 or start at the 872?
That is the 24 and beginning balance of $984,270 from 2023.
Yeah, so the end is 984 from 2023, but that's only because we covered it with $1 million transfer out of the general fund.
Out of the surplus general fund, let's just be clear. So is that, in which we do have a large surplus, so you're saying we're under the 16.6 by how much? We'll end the year, the projection is that we'll end this year with how much under? Because that's 24, I just want to understand.
I don't have that figure in front of me, but I can provide that
Okay.
later.
It's
approximately
so
300,000
so that's
negative.
pretty good. That means we did a pretty
Negative.
good job of budgeting. If we're just below the reserve by 300, I said we pretty much hit the mark then in budgeting for the solid waste fund for this year. That's where we should be. We should be coming in close, not, way under or way over. But, that's not bad if it's a couple $100,000 into the reserve. So what I want to understand then is how much
what is
more.
the total reserve?
It's a 16 point, what is the 16.6
No, not
total?
the percentage, the actual number, the dollar amount.
The target reserve is approximately 1.2 million.
That's the 16.6, 1.2 million. So by the increases that you're proposing, say for next year, what would be the increase overall? I'm sorry, we didn't have all the same charts in our packet.
And for which scenario?
For scenario, for each one, it would be nice to know how much would be the increase in revenue. Just again, given that we just missed the mark by a couple $100,000 this year, but we had a reserve there to cover that.
It's in the text there.
So,
And Chair, I
Yeah.
want to just acknowledge I have my hand up.
okay, I can't tell that here.
No worries.
I do think we need to
No.
bring this discussion, we have to get through the budget, we're going to go through the affordable housing information. And
I'm happy to move this to a close by making a motion that this committee recommends scenario 4.
Second.
Second, but I do have one quick just note to make. To Councilmember Burns' point and Councilmember Kelly's point about the reserve, I really would like us to reconsider the reserve in that if we have a goal of $1.2 million and the example that is raised by staff is that, there's a $200,000, $225,000 out there that could be, seen as the reason for the reserve. I mean, I think that's predictable, and a lot of those charges, we know that we have this deal with Swank and that infrastructure has a lifespan, and that we're going to be responsible for paying a portion of that. So I think we can build those costs in. I can't imagine there being, these huge, trash collection costs sitting out there. So I do think this is potentially a fund that could have a much lower fund balance, so we can get more of that money working in the community and not having to overcharge taxpayers to hold a reserve that isn't necessary.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to accept scenario 4. I think 1.4, that is scenario 4 acceptable to the solid waste fund?
It is.
Okay. So, vote on scenario 4.
Councilmember Kelly? Councilmember Nguyen? Aye. Councilmember Nusma?
Aye.
Committee Member Rikus?
Aye.
Chair Livingston?
Aye.
Councilmember Burns?
Aye.
Councilmember Reed?
Aye.
Committee Member McMillan?
Aye.
Very good. Good discussion.
Thank you.
All right. The next item on our agenda is to discuss Evanston affordable housing. Sure.
I'll move that item for discussion.
Second. Can I maybe ask that, I don't know if, I'm happy to, but really, Councilmember Burns, if you want to set this up, I read the memo, and I think it provides a lot of useful information, but I think maybe just highlighting what the request here is would be useful to frame the discussion.
Yeah, we have Director Flax here, who I believe is going to walk through some information for us. Just quickly, I made this referral. It's pretty straightforward. We do not, in my opinion, we're not creating enough affordable housing units in Evanston. The market is not creating enough affordable housing units in Evanston. We really rely solely on affordable housing organizations to advance this work, and they have their own challenges to generate, to raise funds, and they're able to do projects here and there, relying on LIHTC funding from the federal government, which is a incredibly competitive process that funds most of the affordable housing nationally. But they can't lead on our affordable housing funding. They can't lead on affordable housing funding in any individual city. It's really up to those cities, in my opinion, to lead and to find dedicated sources of revenue to advance this work. And so when we look at the funding that we currently have dedicated towards it, we're lacking quite significantly, and not for a lack of effort. And the funding that has come in to the Affordable Housing Fund is one example. I've gone to some really notable projects, but clearly there's more funds that's needed. And so this is the referral is to talk about one idea to expand, to add another source of revenue to address the rising costs of housing in Evanston. And it was I spoke with Chair Livingston, and he had a few kind of foundational questions about the need in affordable housing in Evanston. And so Director Flax, Director of Community Development Department, is here to share a little bit of background information, and then we can open it up for questions.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, Chair Livingston and members of the committee. I don't necessarily want to take you through all the information that is actually, by chart by chart, but Evanston's is challenged to address its affordable housing goals with the funds that are available. Councilmember Burns is right. Most of our funding comes from low-income housing tax credits. That's been the primary source for the Ann Rainey Apartments, the 60-unit building that was completed in 2021 on Howard Street, the HODC building, which is going to be 33 units on Church and Darrow, and the Peril building that was just introduced, the ordinance was just introduced for that building at South Boulevard, which will be a 60-unit building. Those, not only are those tax credits very competitive, but there has been a problem in Congress. What a surprise. They didn't approve the increased level of tax credits in the last year. Hopefully that's going to be fixed. Mayor Bissom and a number of other officials lobbied for that and, said how important it is. So hopefully that'll get back up. But another challenge of relying exclusively on low-income housing tax credits is it really restricts who we can help and how. Evanston has a great need for very low-income housing for very low-income residents, and that's kind of indicated when you look at the chart that says it's affordable housing supply and lower income demand in Cook County, suburban Cook, in Chicago, and Chicago. So when you look at, it's on page 3 of 6 of the memo. Anyway, in 2014, our rental supply that was defined as affordable for this group, which are people living at or below 150% of the poverty level, was 20.9%. By 2019, it had gone down to 14.8%. So, and these are our most deeply challenged residents. So these are the ones who are going to be living in the types of buildings we just talked about, but there's also incredible pressure on everybody, even up to the median and even up to 120% of median, just based on rising housing costs and the competition for housing. A lot of people want to live here, and so what happens is the people with money win out when it comes to that. Another thing, and this is happening nationwide, and we are generating more households, more smaller households, so the competition for the households is greater, and we need to have more housing units total. Very interesting, in the Washington, D.C. area, they actually have more households, but a declining population. They're a little more extreme than we are. But so there are many, many housing challenges that are going on right now. We actually, if you look at certain charts that I didn't present, because there are a million charts on affordability and lack thereof, but one that we got from the Local Housing Solutions when we were working on the Pier Cities partnership with the Furman Center, the most recent analysis said, wow, there are fewer renters who are housing cost burdened. Well, we have, in the last 3-4 years, we've developed quite a few new developments of our high-rises, which are primarily for higher income people. So we've had an influx of higher income residents that are renting. So it doesn't mean that our lower income residents have gone away. It means that we've just gained more renters and at a higher income because of that housing being built. So those are the changes that you're also seeing. There is a chart that shows the change in our demographics of our population from race and ethnicity. We continue to lose our black population, gain in Hispanics and Latinos, and we actually have more Asians, and percentage-wise, Asians and other multicultural or multiracial than either Cook County or Chicago, but otherwise we are lower in both blacks and Latinos. So some of that information. The Affordable Housing Fund doesn't have a very consistent, well, it has one very consistent source of income. We get $125,000 every year from the Mather, because there's a passageway under Davis. but that's not going to even get us a unit.
Is that a forever contract?
Yeah. There's no.
Is it always 125,
Yeah.
or is there an escalator built in?
Nope. But it's there, which is unusual to have something that there's no end to it, according to what I've seen.
I guess what the 2.7 was in 19, was that the developer contribution that you have?
Yeah.
No.
That was the link. The link was the last building to pay a fee in lieu entirely instead of affordable on-site units. That was approved under the First Amendment to the Inclusionary Housing Ordinance. After the link did that, and they paid us $2.4 million, the attitudes toward how we could get affordable units even under that version of the IHO changed, because we said, oh, these are really PDs. So we can say, we want you to tell us what you can do for affordable housing. So we did that with both the Albion and the Abador. Those two developments both proposed paying full fee in lieu. City pushed back and said we want on-site units. They weren't able to actually supply the full 10% on-site affordable units, but they provided what they could supply, and the city council approved them at that time. The amount, I don't remember completely what our fee in lieu was at that point, but it was nowhere near the cost of a unit. So we still got more units than we would have had we taken that money and tried to build more units. When
Sure.
we are using our affordable housing fund, we generally are leveraging tax credits and not trying to pay for all the units just out of our money, because we would not get very many.
Councilmember Reed, did you have something to add?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, Sarah, thank you for presenting the baseline data. And I think it's clear to all of us that we have an affordable housing crisis on our hands. And we bond out for things that are important. We bond out for infrastructure. We bond out for things that will pay dividends for years to come. And affordable housing will certainly pay dividends for years to come. And Councilmember Nguyen last night said something really important when talking about the Pirol project, which was that when the city has site control, we can get amazing things done. And that is what bonding out for affordable housing can allow the city to do. It can give us funds where we can gain site control, and we can work with folks to put together deals that would not happen but for the municipal government's intervention. And so I am fully in support of us moving forward with this. I appreciate Councilmember Burns for finding this. I think this was taken from a model that Hampton, Virginia is using to build additional affordable housing units. I think it's a great model. I would encourage us to move forward with this and move this forward to council. I don't know if this would be, this bonding would be a part of our, in the traditional sense, the way we look at CIP, or if this bonding would, be moved over to some other, supported by some other mechanism. But I think this is something that is critical and we need to move forward with. And I would love us to potentially at a future meeting or at council explore the economics of this and, the dividends that the city would receive from making this investment. I think we can look at some past investments where the city has had site control and see what the dividends have been there.
So, Mr. Desai, we had talked about, can you bond in the typical way for affordable housing if a project is not identified, is not specifically identified? So I think there's a lot to talk about here, which we need to get on to the budget. I think, thank you so much for highlighting the issue. And but maybe Mr. Desai could just answer that question of, is bonding to support a fund where the asset acquisition is not known?
Point of information. I don't think anyone's proposing that we're just bonding out to put money into the fund. It would be bonding out to support a specific project that the council has identified where we can gain site control, where we can add additional dollars from the city to make an affordable housing project possible. So I don't know if the question requires an answer. in that I don't think anybody's proposing that.
I think it does. I would like an answer because that's not always the case, and that's not how Hampton does it. They just have a line item every year where, you know, I think there's like $1 million or something like that. So I would like that question answered.
I just want to be clear that a line item, just like we've done with the 2023 bonds and 2022 bonds, you create the line item and you say that if something comes up where we're going to charge this account, we can bond out for it at a point. But certainly the question, I guess, is worth answering. But either way, we can bond out throughout, to replace funds that we have spent.
So, yes, we can check whether we can bond out, but it's not more about whether we can bond out. We can. I know it's unknown, but I don't know whether we can bond out as a tax-exempt bonds. Sometimes for TIF projects, even when we generate some income, we have to have a taxable bonds. Here, when we don't know the specific project and whether it's kind of a with the project unknown, unlike the typical any infrastructure project like a streets or sidewalks or anything like that, we might end up issuing the taxable bond. I mean, I'm not sure. I can, check with our bond person and find out whether, we can bond out and whether we can do a tax exempt or taxable bonds when we don't know the project and the value.
So, Councilmember Burnt, where would you like to take this now? I mean, we've had this discussion validated.
Yeah, I mean,
didn't need validation, but sort of highlighted the need. Where should we go next?
I think if anybody has any additional questions, again, we and Sarah knows this. Councilman Reed, also mentioned it. We have several projects that are known that we could move forward with yesterday if we had the funding to do so. So if the recommendation, from Finance Department was to make sure that if we are going to bond out, there are known projects, we could do that.
What's the dollar amount you're talking?
Again, I'd want to work with Sarah on that and her team to determine the dollar amount. But again, I think Hampton does somewhere between $750,000 to $1 million a year. It just depends on if we decide to move forward with known projects versus just having a fund that is available so that when there are opportunities, we can take advantage of them. One example is Community Partners for Affordable Housing has partnered with other communities to purchase properties that are then eventually put into a land trust. But they have set aside a certain amount of funding to do it. So they're not finding property and then, waiting for that individual city to identify funds. They know they have a budget, and so they're able to go out and, as I've said many times before, act as entrepreneurial as the market, in some ways we're competing against, can do to take property off the market once it's available and if it's a good deal for the city. So that's just one example of what we can do with a dedicated source of funding on an annual basis.
I guess I'm a little confused about what we're being asked to do. Are we just sort of conceptually saying, this is something we want to explore more? I mean, I'd want to know a whole lot more about what the dollar amount is. I know you cited the other community. I don't know how large that community is. What the demands are for affordable housing there, et cetera. I mean, it seems like we would need to know a whole lot more detail in order to speak articulately about this.
I think the reason why it's here is if there are any finance and financial related concerns. Chair Livingston had a question a few moments ago that I think is under the scope of this committee, which is this even something we can bond out for? I think that's the feedback that is best fit for this committee. And then from a policy standpoint and, the need, evaluating the need, I see that more as a council discussion. But if there are some finance-related questions,
I think that's what this committee can do. Am I concerned at 50 million? Yeah. Am I less concerned at a lower number? I mean, to add to the city's debt and balance sheet, I would want to see a whole lot more, is I guess what I'm saying.
Yeah, if I could jump in. As I said, thank you, Chair. As I was saying, I think, again, when we bond out for anything else, particularly for this, I think we need to look at the dividends that are paid. When we provide more affordable housing, I think we can get some math on that. also think the real question is, what is our capacity? We know that, and Hitesh and Clayton can clarify if I'm saying anything incorrect, but this council has rolled off $35 million in debt. And if I remember correctly, the annual payment for that, the amortization for that was about $1 million a year in monies that we don't have to spend. And so I think the question is, we know we need it. We know we need a huge amount of it. We could spend 35, we could spend $50 million and still not necessarily meet the need. And so I think the real question is, what can the city afford to take on in an amortized basis for paying for this? And so if we've rolled off 35 million and that means $1 million a year, can the city afford to make an interest payment and a payment of $1 million annually to support this? Or are we looking at $500,000 a year in amortization that we can afford to take on? And I think that's really the number that we need to be looking for.
Ms. Flax, I think you've been wanting to say something, and then
Yeah.
we'll go to Councilmember Kelly.
A couple of things.
Yeah.
We are in the process of applying for a large grant from HUD, which is a competitive grant, and it's based on removing barriers to affordable housing and developing affordable housing. And that is going to be submitted at the end of this month, and we're supposed to hear in January. And we're going to ask for $10 million. It's very aggressive. Will we get it? I have no idea. It's a highly competitive grant, but so is NSP2, and we got that, so I don't want to give up. I'd like us to see if we get that. I think bonding can be a very important thing for us to look at, but I also think we can put some scope around projects and timing and talk about what, we have some sites, like the Emerson and Jackson site, which is we acquired for the purpose of development. So I personally wouldn't recommend we try to set a number at this time. We also have some other opportunities. Private activity bonds are potentially of more value now as interest rates rise. And those are, we have, I think it's about $7.8 million in our bond volume cap, Hitesh, if we actually applied for it. But we can... and that could help fund a project, and that doesn't go against our bonding because that is underwritten on the housing developer, for example. So there are some things that I think we ought to look at. Also, CDBG Section 108 loans, which we can borrow very, very inexpensively. But Councilmember Burns and Reed are right. If we want to really make a difference, we have to have more revenue that we can control, and it's especially important if it's for anything above the lowest income, which is really where the federal dollars are focused.
So Councilmember Kelly, and then I think we need to move on to the budget. But
Okay.
this was an exploratory discussion. I think we can have some follow-up points on how would we fund, what are different options to fund, and what are amounts that make sense as a goal. So,
Right,
Councilmember
and I would
Kelly.
just say certainly you want to look at those options with keeping in mind affordability in Evanston. We don't want to, bond out in a way that makes Evanston even less affordable in the name of creating more affordability. So, and with that, I think we are looking at either a regular line item or if we bond, then it would have to be once we know what we would want to develop. And I will just say on my part that I would only be comfortable with this, and I would be comfortable with this if we're talking about land trusts, so that where we're creating affordability in perpetuity. I would not be favorable in any way, shape, or form in investing with investors that, where this could potentially sunset. So I would have no interest in setting aside money that would ever be used for that, only used for, something like a land trust like the SEPA that you spoke to. Thank you.
And if you wouldn't mind, Chair, if I could have the last word. If you reference the example that I provided a few moments ago, that's exactly what I said. Is that for me, even a win for me would be, as early as next year, being able to set aside anywhere between $750 to $1 million in our bond requests to work with community partners for affordable housing, to purchase property. It doesn't have to be vacant land. It could be property similar to what we did on Hoveland recently, where we purchased a property. They're going to put in the rehab dollars, and then put the single family home will go into their land trust, and they'll be able to sell it affordably. Even if we can just do that next year, To me, that would be a win. And SEBA could put together a proposal in a matter of weeks to do that because they've already done it successfully in other communities. So for me, the vision behind this request was thinking about what a partnership could look like with SEPA to advance affordable housing project models that they have already successfully done in other communities. And we could have them, at council to talk about how that has worked out in other communities. But I agree with you 100%. I think the importance is making sure that the housing that we provide is affordable in perpetuity.
Right, and I don't think we necessarily need to even talk about bonding for this. This could be a line item if we're going to discuss it. I don't think there's any reason to talk about leveraging yet more debt on our already very, very indebted city.
Yeah, I don't think
debt's expensive.
I don't think it's going to necessarily. It's not. To me, it's not going to. There's no evidence to suggest that it will lead to greater affordability issues in Evanston, but this is to force a conversation about a dedicated source of revenue, to expand the dedicated sources of revenue for affordable housing in Evanston. You know that in closed session meetings, we've discussed using excess reserves or general reserve funds, I'm not getting too much details, but to advance our affordable housing work, and there was not support for it necessarily. So, again, we can't keep moving the goalposts. I'm certainly supportive of using our general reserves, finding a line item in our general reserve or in our general fund. But if we're not going to do that, I think that's when we need to look at the bonding out, as we do for many other projects that are approved.
Thank you. One last comment also. I think a team is working on revising the IHO, right, our inclusionary housing ordinance.
Yes,
and
we
so
are.
So I think we want to wait and see what that also might bring forward in terms of payments in lieu of affordability on site, and also wait for see what happens with the grant that they've applied for.
Yeah, and I don't agree with that. I think our IHO ordinances, we know what it'll bring. It'll bring smaller units, mostly downtown, because that's where most of those developments are. And recently, relatively recently, we passed a policy that really incentivizes or requires developers to put more affordable units on site. Right now, 5% out of the 10% of the units affordable units have to be on site, and you can only opt out of 5% of the units. I think what we're seeing is more and more people are not deciding to opt out, and they're putting more of the units on site, which is what we want, I think, ultimately, right?
We're also looking at raising the percentage requirement because of the state property tax benefits that are in the form of a tax credit for long-term affordable housing at or below 60% of area median that benefits the developer in addition. So we're looking at that. We're also looking at if there are other ways we can use look at development that is not covered by the inclusionary housing ordinance to apply some sort of fee or something to start getting a small amount of money, at least, from those sources for affordable housing. So we'll come back with all that.
So in my mind, especially because of this last thing I'll say, Chair, especially because of the dollar amount that I'm thinking about, if anything, I think it's not an or, it's an and. Ideally, if we were truly committed to addressing the affordable housing issue, we would be using money, excess reserves, bonding out, grant funds, which Director Flax mentioned, the $10 million that we're applying for from the federal government. So again, the need is so great that to me it's an and thing. It's not an or thing. This is something that I plan to move forward. We can come back with more information about how we may be able to bond out, and in addition to that, creating a line item as well. But I appreciate the time on this agenda, Chair. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, so much for 5:45 being when we start talking about the budget. But we've had a really good discussion on the solid waste and the affordable housing, and it was worth it. And I think as we move on to the budget. Look, this was just posted on Friday night. This is sort of one of the initial discussions relative to the budget. I think if obviously some highlights in here. There's a proposed property tax increase in here. We've leveraged a lot of the tools, I think, that we've developed over the last year of a multi-year view of some additional breakouts of revenues. If it makes sense to everyone, why don't we let Hitesh and Clayton maybe go through the presentation, and then we can come back. Obviously, this is our first discussion of what will be many discussions relative the budget. But, and also to the degree everyone has not had a chance to already review it, I think the transmittal letter that is in the proposed budget is an excellent summary of where things are and why they're there, and would hope everyone has had an opportunity to read that, that first part of the budget, which I think does a good job of framing the overall discussion. And that was what was posted on Friday. So, Mr. Desai.
Thank you again, Chair Livingston and the members of the committee. As you mentioned, the proposed budget went out on Friday. It is posted on the website. Kind of brief calendar, which we do have, but yeah, there will be a discussion at the City Council on October 16th as special City Council. Then for the next few weeks, we would go to the few ward meetings, town hall meetings, Spanish town hall, similar to the last year, a couple of budget hearings and October end, and the Truth and Taxation hearing on the November 6th. Pretty much, yeah, it's like a next 6 to 8 weeks, in our calendar, I think we are saying November 27th as the kind of a budget adoption. So let's go to the first slide, which is right here. Okay. Yeah, so this is what we have covered in the presentation. Overall budget, obviously the 23 general fund projection, sometimes that's a good tool to kind of dive into the next year. So we have provided that, how we project to end our 23 general fund. Next is obviously the proposed budget, revenues, expense, how we budget balancing. This is again the proposed budget. This is what the staff thinks. So obviously it will be subject to change as we get the input and feedback from the council, from the people at the ward meetings, town hall meeting. And the future projection, yeah, and that's very important. Sometimes the short term is too rosy to make the things, just based on that spending decision, and that's why we have to look at the 24, 25, 26. How does it look 2 years down the road, Are we still in a comfortable financial position, whether we can, make the sound financial spending decision? Tax and fee increases, what we are proposing here, one is the property tax, just a little bit of the total, and obviously Clayton, as he gets onto each individual slide, he will go into detail why we had proposed it and what percentages. This is mainly because of the wage increase, some of those pensions cost, and the other things. Ambulance fees, we are proposing to have the ambulance increase, which won't impact the low-income people or the others. We are trying to get where the people have a good insurance, so that's what we are going to target. And the water rates and the solid waste, obviously you have heard a lot about it, so I won't go in that. The new positions, that's again, we have covered in our thing. Capital improvement, one of the main things, yes, how many dollars under which fund. So we have a couple of slides about the capital improvement program, and finally the fund balance and the projection for each individual funds. So this is the bigger number, overall budget, looking at $449 million. Again, everyone says, oh, it has gone up. The main reason is the salaries and wages are almost $20 million. Those four union contracts and the non-union. Capital projects, there is a $15 million increase in CIP, and some of them is not a new one. It's rolled over, not spent in this year maybe, and so it's rolled over into next year. And then additional increase in the water fund. Again, there's a little bit of a rollover in the water fund too about that big project. MFT fund, where we have a spending to draw up on our existing fund balance, and the ARPA is the other one. So that kind of combines to give you an idea about that $51 million. We just put the City Council goals. Council met on Saturday, kind of already had a discussion about that, but we just kept it there. The finance is one of the important goals, responsible and sustainable stewardship of city assets. And that's what at least we're trying to kind of, propose here from the staff standpoint based on the numbers and the projections in the out years. Okay. Overall budget, again, this is just a graph. If you look at the last 4 years, how the things have, and again, if you look at that, what is the reason? Some of those things are the capital projects. The ARPA in last couple of years has been a big contributor. So those are a couple of big ones, water CIP, general CIP, the ARPA expenditure. And obviously, the next year, the wage increase is a big factor. Okay, and same thing here by the categories. You would see that other categories mainly because of inflation, but ARPA is almost 1/6 of that. Salaries is almost 1/5, 1/4, and then the waterfront project. So this is like, yeah, kind of we put out on the graphs chart, easily understandable for sometimes the residents, you know. Okay. General fund projections. Okay, Clayton, you want to just start and go into details here?
I think so, yeah. It's not clicking. All right, so this is our general fund projections. We have a few slides talking about how we think we're going to finish this year in terms of general fund balance and how that compares to the reserve policy. This is an interesting slide. So this shows our year-to-date as of the end of August this year compared to our year-to-date as of the end of August last year. So if you look in the far right column, you'll see that at the end of August last year, we were at a $19.1 million surplus in the general fund, well on our way to the $26 million surplus that we generated last year. At the end of this August, we've drawn on the fund balance. We're sitting in a deficit of about $3 million. When you look at the individual lines, you can see year-to-date through August, we've spent about $10 million more on salaries, benefits, insurance, and other chargebacks. I think that's the wage increases that we're talking about. That's kind of the headline for this budget, and the reason for the increase and reason for many of the things that we're talking about is the wage increase. We're sitting at a negative fund balance, a net deficit of $3 million through the end of August. That doesn't include the AFSCME retro pay, which will come out on the first week of November, as well as the non-union wage increases, which are scheduled to take effect towards the end of this month.
On the revenue side, there's two categories that are way down, the intergovernmental revenue and the other taxes.
The other taxes down by $4 million. I think one of the big contributors there, probably two. The real estate transfer tax, $2 million of that was reallocated to the reparations fund. So the first $2 million we get, and that was generating a ton of revenue last year. It was doing really, really well. So I think that's probably the main reason for the difference. In intergovernmental, I believe is where we put and record PPRT. And income taxes from the state of Illinois. So PPRT has been down from last year, which is why you see the difference between where we were at last year versus this year. So this just kind of lays the foundation that this year's a lot different than last year. Last year, wages were pretty stable, not keeping up with inflation. We've seen with the new contracts that has changed. And so this is kind of the new trajectory that does give us a little concern as we look at future year projections. So in terms
just one point, not a question, just the full year budget for 23. There've been a lot of puts and takes, right, in terms of revenue and in terms of incremental costs, but the anticipated deficit for 23, as I recall, was in the $5 million range.
Yes, and I'll build to that here in a couple slides. So in terms of revenues, you saw this back in August. We took a look at refreshing this, but we still feel pretty comfortable with these revenue projections. We offer the low projection and the high projection. You can see that we think we'll finish the year between 10 and 13 million up in revenues. I think that the last couple months of experience has led us to feel more comfortable about the high projection. I think we'll probably be closer to that. The last couple months have kind of kept pace with the first part of the year, but this is still the range that we're thinking we'll finish in terms of revenues. On the other side are expenses. This year's budget included a net deficit of $10.1 million. What this means is with $13 million in additional revenues, we've essentially erased that net deficit and brought in a little bit more on revenues. Going down the list, you'll see a handful of things that the City Council has approved this year that were unbudgeted and above and beyond what we had set. This is covering overages on various capital projects as well as higher than budgeted wage increases that I've already talked about. So when you consider the revenues and the expenses, This shows where we think we'll finish the year. We should finish with a net deficit of between 5.4 million and 8.7. Again, since we're thinking the high projection is probably more in line with where we'll finish, we think we'll finish with a net deficit of about $5.4 million this year. That would be a fund balance of 52.3 million, which is great news because it's above and beyond our fund balance policy of 16.66%. We'll finish the year in a fairly strong cash position, just a little bit down from where we finished last year. And that's the really, really good news, that we should finish this year moving into next year in a fairly good, strong position. So that's the projections for 23. Looking ahead now to the budget for 2024, this slide shows our proposed general fund budget for revenues. You'll see we've shown our low projection and our high projection this year, as well as our budget for next year. Going down the list, these revenues account for 83% of general fund revenues, and the other 17% are rolled into the all other general fund revenue line. So we're essentially showing you the revenues that matter most in the general fund. Our budget for next year we've set either within the range of where we'll finish this year or higher for all but two revenues. Those two are PPRT, where we've received information from the Illinois Municipal League and ADJOUR that this is a revenue that we will see a decrease in next year compared to this year. So we've set next year's budget at a slightly lower amount based on what that direction was. The other revenue that we've set lower than our range are building permits. Those are really unpredictable and very contingent on the projects that the City Council authorizes to move forward. And there's a handful that are still on hold. It doesn't include anything for the Ryan Field project, so that's a big one that would make a huge difference, but just note that our budget doesn't include any revenue from that project. So these are our revenue budgets for next year. In terms of expenses, the highlights, first, the wage increases, as Hitesh said, we're looking at about 19 million citywide. I mean, the solid waste was one example you already talked about where we've seen increases in wages, which means it creates strain on the fund. In the general fund, we're looking at about $12 million in increases to salaries based on those collective bargaining agreements. In terms of new positions, there are 15.6 new positions included in the proposed general fund budget. Several of those have already received authorization by the City Council to move forward, and we have a slide that covers those later. Next is an increase in the transfer to the fleet fund. This came up during solid waste. The folks in the fleet fund are paid by the general fund. They've also received the contractual wage increases, fuel, vehicle parts, all feeling the pressure of inflation over the last couple of years, so we've made an increase to keep that fund out of the negative. Public safety pensions, this budget follows the policy approved by City Council earlier this year of fully funding our pensions to keep them on track for fully funded by 2040. That's about $5 million from sources that were previously available to the general fund that have been allocated to make sure that we're following the direction within that policy. And then finally, operating requests. Many of them are outlined in the transmittal letter that the chair talked about. And we've also got budget memos posted on the website that go into detail on all the major new requests that are included in the budget. So in order to balance the budget, our baseline had a net positive, a net surplus of 5.4 million. But once you add in the salary increases, the new positions, the operating requests, the transfer to the fleet fund, as well as the full funding of pensions, you create the deficit that we then need to correct. And so at the top, you can see a handful of measures that we've taken in order to balance the general fund. These include an increase in the net property tax levy, which we'll go into more detail on in a few slides, increases to transfers, and increases to ambulance fees, which we will also cover here in a little bit. Ultimately, it still leaves a $10.4 million deficit in the general fund because of the wage increases and all the other items I mentioned. So we would draw on that really strong fund balance that I talked about in order to balance the general fund in 2024. So the 2024 general fund budget includes $10.35 million of that reserve in order to be balanced. So while we have the reserves available to fill that gap, that's great, but I think it's the trajectory that gives us concern. Along the lines of that trajectory, so this shows the general fund balance future years with the proposed tax levy increase. As it shows, even with the tax levy increase, we're still looking at net deficits between 10 and 13 million from 24 through 27. We would use up the reserve fund balance under this approach around 2026. And again, these are based on our projections, based on the revenue trends that we talked about earlier, based on the new wage increases. One thing I failed to mention on the last slide that I should is that our budget also includes a 2% vacancy rate for staffing vacancies. So that's 1.8 million. So we've built that into these future projections as well. It assumes that it's not a one-time increase to the levy. It assumes it's not increased beyond that in future years, but yes. So next slide here, if I can. So this shows our fund balance versus the policy. The red is our fund balance policy, and the blue columns represent the fund balance in the general fund with the proposed property tax increase. As you can see, it's a trajectory. Again, it's the concern that with the wage increases, we've created, a structural deficit within the fund. That in order to sustain those wage increases, even with the property tax increase, there are some challenges being able to cover that once this current reserve balance would be used up, and under this scenario, that would be in 2026. Without the proposed property tax increase, you can see net deficits between 13.9 million up to 17 million. And in the chart on the following page, you can see that under this scenario, we would use up the fund balance by 2025. We would finish the year slightly below policy. So again, under both scenarios, really burning through that reserve balance. And so that's the concern and the reason why we get to the next slide where we talk about the property tax levy and the reasons for the increase here. So over the past 3 years, the property tax levy overall for the city has been increased by 1%, 0%, and 0%. Our wage increases this year, we're looking at between 11% and 18% for our staff this year. And then I believe everybody gets a 3 to 4% next year, depending on what employee group you're in. While many of our inflationary revenues have been able to keep our economy-based revenues have kept up with inflation, the property tax is one that doesn't keep up with inflation unless the city council approves increases to it. And so at rates of 1 and 0 and 0, staff's recommending that this be considered to cover 30% of the proposed, or 30% of the wage increase for next year. So you can see the total increase to the net levy comes out to about 4.4 million. 3.7 of that is in the general fund, and again, that's to cover 30% of the wage increases that were approved this year. There's a small swap between human services and general assistance. The general assistance fund has built up a fairly decent fund balance, whereas the human services fund, we've seen some increased spending there that it makes sense to decrease one by 250 and increase the human services by 250,000. In the library fund, they're looking at, and the library board approved a 9% increase to their levy. It is ultimately the city council's decision to approve that increase or consider that increase. But they're proposing 9% to cover the 11% wage increases that those employees received. And then you see some slight changes in debt service for the city, a reduction there based on the retirement of debt, and some slight increases in the library fund debt service levy, for a total overall increase of 7.9%. So you can see here on this slide, we show that a 7.9% increase would result in a $155.96 increase to a $400,000 homes property tax bill. And keep in mind, this is just the city's portion of the property tax levy, which, as we show on the next slide, comes out to 20% of your total property tax bill. So we're talking about increasing that 20% of your bill by 7.8%, which again comes out to $155 on a $400,000 home. You can see larger portions of your property tax bill go to School District 65, District 202, Cook County, and other taxing districts. And we just ran these numbers yesterday to make sure that they were still accurate, and this is indeed the case based on 2021 rates. These are composite tax rates. So Cook County has not yet released 2022 composite tax rates, so we are using 2021. Composite tax rates are the sum or the average of all taxing districts within a community. So it considers the school districts within each of these communities, the city, the library, the park districts. And as you can see, Evanston does fall quite low from a composite tax rate standpoint. Not to say they're not all high, but we're fortunately on the bottom end of the communities that we took a look at. From Oak Park up there at 12.466%. We included all of our neighbors here. If there's anybody that we may have missed, we're certainly welcome to that information. But definitely telling, I think the main reason that Evanston's able to keep its rate low, we have the library under the umbrella of the city, the park district under the umbrella of the city, township under the umbrella of the city, and those are separate taxing districts in other communities that have higher tax rates because they need a finance department, and they need a human resources department, and they need a leadership, a manager. And so apples to apples. Correct. Same for health department. Evanston has it under its umbrella, whereas maybe these other ones, I don't know if the Cook County Health Department has a property tax levy or not, but
If I could just, I think a lot of people would, this isn't the general impression, right? And I think we need, maybe we could add more communities here. I don't know, but I think this would surprise a lot of people. And I wonder if it's changed over time as Evanston sort of on the city side reduced. But at any rate, this chart surprised me. And I don't know if it surprised, others. So.
If I can, a quick question there, and then when it comes time, I have my hand up. But where would Chicago fall on this list?
Good question, and not one I have offhand. We can definitely add it to the list, though, and see.
Yeah, that's a community. Again, yes, we are a suburban community, but we are on the border. We are competing for residents and for businesses with Chicago as well. And so I'd just love to see where they are on this list.
Sure.
And
the 20%, 17% of the 20 is the city, and the 3% is the library. So we're talking about a 7.9% on 20% of your bill. School districts typically increase. Why am I not remembering?
The school district, they are kind of limited under the PTEL to the CPI plus the new construction, so obviously they would try to capture the most. So you might see the increase. Yeah, we don't have the numbers, even just to add this is a good chance. I mean, I just got the rates for the city side for 22, and which has gone down by 15%. But I don't have the full composite rate for what's the school districts and park districts. They are still ask all the taxing agencies to review those numbers, and I think they said that in October end we might have the full number.
And just one more quick question. So a lot of residents protest their taxes. What happens when they protest them and they go down? How does that affect the whole budget process?
So this is, I mean, as you know, first thing, it affects more to the school district because they are almost 70%. We are, the city is only 17%, library is 3%, so total 20%. So obviously they have a bigger stake, particularly on the commercial side. And so many times they have some threshold that if the assessment goes down, we are notified, including us and the school district, if it's more than 100,000 assessed value going down, so we can appeal that. And obviously sometimes the school district take, I don't know, whether their threshold is different, but if it's a large, I mean, in the past 2 years back when we had this triennial assessment, and then as a part of the appeals, it went down substantially, after all those appeals were settled. But it does affect, like suppose what happened is when we got our 21 numbers, EAV numbers, the equalized assessed value and all that, we lost EAVs last year. And this year EAV has come back again by almost $500 million. But I'm waiting for the full numbers from the
Councilmember Kelly, did you have something to add?
I think the question that...
Yeah, so I just wanted to respond a little bit to Sherry's question. I mean, I think it's important to know that, so if somebody is able to bring there's the tab, the total tab from each school district and our tab, it just gets redistributed. I mean, so
Yes.
So, and then I also want to say what a number that's really important to know is what are we paying per capita in, for example, in debt? Do we know what our debt per capita is? Because, okay, that would be I think that's an important number for everybody to know, especially on this committee, but also for our residents. So I just want to point out, I mean, we went from last year a budget of $325 million to next year $450 million. So I just want that to settle in. From 325 last year to 450 in 24 is what's being proposed. That's a huge increase.
Point of information, it was 395.
No, it was reduced. It was reduced. I have the amendment right here. It was reduced to 325 when we took off. We had a budget amendment to reduce our budget last year to 325. If you'd like me to read from that, I will. So anyway, that's an enormous increase. I have, I guess, a lot of questions about ways that, things I'm still waiting for some answers to. For example, for the amount that we're budgeting for, this isn't terribly, we're not budgeting 90%, or is that still 90% on the pensions, that amount? I know it's staying
Oh, it's
flat.
100%. It's the actuarial calculated 100% funding by
No, we're not
2040.
billing property tax at 100%. I think it's still at 90, correct? It's still at 90?
It's the same number it's been.
It's
right.
based-
So it's.
Oh, I understand it's
been
the same
flat.
number. I'm just wondering if it fluctuated
Based on
from now.
last-
It's under 90
It's
now.
based on
There's-
last year's
yeah.
90 because it was locked in at last year's rate, which is probably less than 90 now.
Okay, so that's approximately about nine. And do we have those numbers to know, like what that, so the tab will be similar in terms of 90% represents, that amount is actually identical to last year, the 90%?
Yeah, excuse me, the 90% is identical to last year.
So the 90% of what the city's tab is on our public safety pensions, I see it staying the same. We're keeping it the same this year. So I know is it about?
So under the policy, the pension property tax is frozen in dollars until under the formula we would indicate that we have to do an increase. So as the actuarially determined calculation has increased in total cost, I would say that pension tax levy is now under 90%, right? Because we're at a higher number, and that frozen levy would be
Well, or it could
less.
if it really was decreasing, it would push it up to paying a higher percentage. But I think it's probably about the same because I think there was a slight increase.
Probably
in what we-
approximately 90-ish, but it's not 90% of the total actuarially calculated
Right, I
number.
mean, that's what it has
It's
been in the past.
frozen.
In
It's
the pa-
frozen at what it is. General fund picks up the rest. Well, the PPRT
And not by
is
policy.
allocated.
Policy was still at 90%. That's why I wondered if that, because it just happens to be the exact same number. So
But I think it's really good we're not having a big debate about what the pension contribution
I'm glad we
is.
aren't either. But I do think we should have a debate about the IMRF because we are $53 million in the black. Our city, and I just want to understand, I've sent some emails wanting to get a better understanding. So we are 53 million over in the IMRF, but yet we're $250 million
Right,
in
and
debt to our
that's
public
because the way
sector.
that was funded over time is a multi-employer plan.
Yeah, so, well, no, this is just the city's portion, not
No,
nothing.
but it's our piece of it. It's a multi-employer plan.
Right, so, and I would
No,
cover
it's
both
the
the things,
cities.
I mean, Chair Livingston is right. The funding policy where you said that, okay, we would going forward fund the pensions on 100% level instead of a 90%, but without any tax increase, and that's what we are doing. We froze the tax levy, which was there last year. Any incremental income based on the actual valuation is coming out of general fund. And so that's how we
Right.
budgeted in general fund.
So I think because of our investments, we've done well on the IMRF, and because we,
I'm just talking about first, the pension side, where we have frozen the kind of the value of the tax.
on the levy for the
Right.
public safety.
And any incremental, and which is roughly same as last year, I looked at almost 4.9 million is coming out of the general fund for the public safety pensions. On the IMRF side, I know I saw your few emails. It's not in the same fashion as the pension fund, the way they report the multi-employer. Obviously, they have a pretty good years when the market was doing. There were years when they made $5-6 billion in a year because the portfolio is quite big. It's like a 50 billion plus portfolio. So obviously that gives us a lot of, the advantage. But they give us our numbers. Yes, they do give us that. How did Evanston do? These are your additions during the year. like the contribution. from
Right,
it.
so like we're in debt with the public safety, but we're over for IMRF. So how does that, what does that mean?
It is a
for-
total shame that the public safety pension plans were not funded on a multi-employer basis.
Sure, I'm not- but I just wanna know if we can
It was
say-
a bill. There was no discretion to pay it.
I'm
right?
just
It
wondering
was-
if for the IMRF, if we can reduce our payment,
No,
given
it's
that.
a bill. You can't. You know,
In
it is.
IMRF, I cannot take the money. What we can do is, there is a way. No, you're right. If we are funded more than 120%, which we are not, then we have a chance to reduce our rate. But we cannot take the cash that, okay, give us 5 million from.
Not give us, but we would reduce our payment. I'm just wondering because according to the records that I see from
Right.
our, from our actuary, we are 53 million over.
But our funding level is not where we can say, okay, we want to use 10 million towards the rate decrease. We should be at least 120%.
Okay, and what does that represent, that 53 million? What percent over does, I don't know. I'm
I'll
just
check, yeah.
asking because,
I can give you that number, but yeah, we are not at that.
so obviously I'm
threshold.
not saying to take it. I'm just wondering if that allows us to put some, in rather than the 3 point whatever we pay annually, if instead we can put less there and put more towards the pensions, because we've seen that there's an exponential benefit to paying down our debt in the public safety pensions.
And I think our rates have gone down. You would see that our, like, what we have only levied for 800,000 in the IMRF pension. I mean, we were as high as in some of the years at 11%. We are now as low as, I think, 2.99 this year. So it's like, yeah, almost 1/3 of what we used to pay, or 1/4.
So this year, how much towards IMRF?
2.99% employer contribution, which used to be as high as 11%, 10%, or even 8-9%. But again, one thing which you would remember, and I think what Chair Livingston is referring to, because of their portfolio, they can leverage that investment return. And as I said, in some of the years where they kind of made $5 to $6 billion in investment gains, which helped all communities to reduce their rate.
Hi, this is
Sure.
Leslie McMillan. Sorry, I have my hand up.
As do I.
You know,
I would note that for the chair.
what's that, Devon?
Then Councilmember Reed, and Ms. McMillan, then Councilmember Reed. And then I think we're out of time, but this has been a excellent sort of introduction, and I think we know what the issues are, okay, that we're going to have to delve into further. But, so maybe, Leslie, why don't you make a brief
I
comment,
just
and
wanted
then.
to point out, from the amended budget from last year to 325 to what we're talking about now, we're talking about a 38% increase, which is a staggering amount. That's enormous. And while I think we can say, hey, thank goodness we're not as high as Oak Park, I don't think any of us would argue that our taxes are low here. I mean, we're some of the highest in the country. And I think what pains me on this is I think so much of what we're talking about is fairly regressive. And, even though it is X amount for a $400,000 house, for families that are going to be facing higher energy bills this year, they're going to be facing higher water, we don't know what's going to happen with the schools. I think it's a lot to ask our families. And when we're talking about losing Black population, I don't think we can just kind of look away from that fact. I think it's one of the things that is deterring families from moving here. So, I think we've done a good job getting a better handle on revenues. I think we could still do better. But what I really think we need to talk about is how to reduce some of these other expenses. I mean, I would look at things, if I were king, I would look at things like, consultants, et cetera. But that is an enormous increase in any year. I know we've had, a lot of inflation, but it certainly hasn't been 38%. And you can argue, yes, there's been some deferred spending, but that's a big number. And I think that, the community is looking to us to help them understand why we need that bigger number. And it's going to really burden a lot of our, I think it's going to be very regressive on a lot of our residents, the increase.
Thank you. Chair, if I may.
Sure.
I want to pick up there, too. I have a few points that I want to raise, but I'll start there, which is, okay, I understand that we're saying $155 for the 400K home for the family, but we also have to consider the commercial levy. And we know that rental properties fall under the commercial levy which means that the levy could, I don't know. So I'd love to see that number from staff as well to understand what burden are we putting on renters disproportionately, right? Because the housing provider is not going to just benevolently accept that increase and not pass it on to the folks renting in their units. And so I think that increase would be even more burdensome on renters. And so I'd love to see that information as well. And so with that in mind, you know, I think, you know, I certainly agree with staff. We need to fix the structural deficit. I certainly agree that, you know, being responsible and having the tough conversations with our taxpayers about raising property taxes on a regular basis to meet our needs is the responsible thing to do. I do think that it has been the practice of municipal governments across the nation, particularly here in Illinois and here in Evanston, to over-rely on property taxes because it's the easiest form of revenue. It's guaranteed revenue. We know if we ask, you know, whatever we set our levy at, that is what we are getting, you know, no matter how, roughly, depending on how it's distributed across folks. And so I really want us to, you know, we have not increased property taxes yet this year, this term, and I think we need to, you know, potentially continue down that road. You know, I've put forward millions of dollars worth of new revenue ideas, right? Are they all fun, right? Or is charging, you know, your grandma or aunt from Arlington Heights to park at one of our community centers, is that fun? No, but it's less regressive, and it's an avoidable tax, or a fee, but it's less regressive than raising rents in our community when one of our top goals is affordable housing. So I'd really love to get that data, and I'd really love for us to explore less regressive sources of revenue. I've got at least $4 million worth of new revenue that we can consider if we're willing to make decisions that are not necessarily easy, but are less regressive than raising property taxes. Next, I'll say that I do think that the pension math there is a bit misleading when you say that there are $5 million in new payments that are supported by the general fund that weren't in the past. As we discussed in our meeting with Councilmember Kelly and Harris, really that number is $500,000 if you're, you know, between previous years and the proposed 2024, right? Because we were making pension payments, we just weren't making the full pension payment, and so really that difference year over year is about $500,000, and I think that's important to keep in mind. And I'd really love us, right? We have a surplus. I'd really love to sit down with the budget team further to understand, are we facing a structural deficit, which I think we are, right? I think the evidence is leading there, or are we adding new expenditures because we have this excess reserve balance? And are some of these expenditures that we can, obviously the salaries and other things are not, are there expenditures here that we could expect to drop off in years to come? And then lastly, for a question for Hitesh, is regarding interest payments. So we have 50 million, well, we have much more than that across all of the funds, and Councilmember Kelly has been asking for some time to get a picture of all of our reserves across funds, and particularly our excess reserves across funds. I'm really interested in seeing that number. So I will support that request. But I'd like to understand what we brought in interest, and my understanding, Hitesh, is that we are getting a rate of a 5.5% interest rate from Byline Bank. Is that correct?
Yes, that is
correct. Go ahead. And then so if we're getting 5.5% from Byline, how much money are we holding in Byline?
How much money we
and
have?
How does that compare? Yeah, and then how does that compare? That interest rate, how does that compare to some of the other accounts that we're holding money in?
So we are holding the money with the several banks. Byline is one of the ones, which is all operating accounts. We have few millions, and I think I can bring up the last investment report, which we put at a quarterly investment report.
So I think we're out of time. Okay, maybe there's a couple of points that keep coming back up that maybe you could post and circulate some information, which is where the cash investments are, but also we have got to provide additional clarity on the fund balances by fund and what the excess are, and what are the discretionary funds, right?
Can I make a
What are
quick,
the ones
can
could
we
be-
send questions to you and then maybe, because we all have a lot of, this was really informational, this was great, but we have a lot of questions, but can we send them to you ahead of time so we can see the answers ahead of time?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'm still waiting for answers.
And then I just wanted to say one last thing to end the meeting. This overall budget, city council goals, is really good. I've never seen it before, and I think the public should see this, because I do think there's a lot of good work in here. And I do think that it just shows the thoughtfulness of the city council, and I don't know how we can communicate this to the residents, but I was fortunate to see it, and I don't know who else can, so.
So final, Councilmember Kelly, and then we'll.
I
we'll
just
adjourn.
think, two things. I'm going to circle back on the comment about the water. I mean, this committee is really important for our city. I mean, for me, it's everything, looking at how our dollars spent. The budget is the blueprint of our priorities. I'm concerned, like the water, that it just kind of ran off and we didn't actually make a recommendation. I agree with Mr. Fasico. That should have carried on today to make a recommendation. That's a huge increase. We should be carried that discussion forward, and I certainly hope we can schedule additional meetings on the budget. Again, we ran out of time. This concerns me, that we're just going to meet monthly now, and we're in October. So I ask that, apart from the goal, maybe during the goal setting, that we continue this conversation or consider scheduling additional meetings.
I would second that.
All right, great.
Okay, so with that, we are adjourned.